One truth about life is this: we only truly know people by the stories they choose to tell us. You may have a friend or someone you love who is hiding their true self or identity for a long time without your knowledge. What happens when those stories are constructed entirely of shadows? When the person sitting across from you at dinner, the person whose hand you hold, who you love dearly, is a carefully curated fiction. Well, in the spring of 1988, a young woman in Wisconsin stepped out of her front door to confront a ghost. She was going to seek a confrontation of truth, because she had realized through her own quiet persistence that the man she loved did not exist, at least not by the name he had given her. This realization would lead her to a bowling alley in West Allis, and from there into one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of the Midwest. This is a journey into a world of manufactured identities. It's a case where the search for a missing woman led investigators from a quiet suburban driveway into the deep silence of a Milwaukee cemetery. Along the way, the legal system would be pushed to its limits, using secret inquiries to try and break a decade-long wall of silence. We're looking at this today as an educational record, a way to understand how a life can be swallowed by another person's secrets. To understand the disappearance of Sandra Bertolas, one must first understand the world she inhabited. This channel is dedicated to educational and documentary examinations of unsolved history. If you'd like to support this work, please subscribe. It helps us keep the light on these cold cases. Back to the timeline. Sandra, known as Sandy to her friends and family, was 20 years old in the spring of 1988. She lived in Menomonee Falls, a suburb of Milwaukee that at the time felt like the quintessential Midwestern stability. Sandy was a student of aesthetics, enrolled in a local beautician school at Cutcutters. According to the people around her, her life was a structured one. She was loved by everyone, was focused on her education and the pursuit of a career. She was described by those who knew her as radiant but grounded, a young woman who valued order and honesty. Her family also stated she was pregnant at the time she disappeared, so this makes the subsequent events all the more jarring. The Wisconsin of 1988 was a place on the cusp of a digital revolution that hadn't quite arrived. In that era, identities were far easier to fabricate. There were no social media profiles to vet, no instant background checks available with the touch of a button. If a man told you his name was Clarence Schott and gave you an address, his word was often the only currency you had. It was an era of analog trust, and it was within this specific historical context that a sophisticated deception began to root its seats in Sandra's life. For several months, Sandra had been dating a man she believed she knew intimately. They shared meals, dreams, and spent a lot of time together. But by April 1988, the cracks in the facade had become impossible to ignore. Sandra had discovered through her own investigation that her boyfriend was using a false surname. He didn't live where he said he lived, and he wasn't who he said he was at all. Even more devastating, he had a steady girlfriend in Milwaukee. On the morning of April 24, 1988, Sandra Bertolas attended a bridal shower, a day that was meant for celebrating new beginnings and the sanctity of marriage of a friend. However, those who spoke to her that day noted a sense of quiet resolve, that she was determined to get it over with. She told friends that she was going to meet her boyfriend that evening. She used a specific phrase: she was going to have it out with him. Maybe Sandra was not angry, she just wanted to reclaim her reality, and she could no longer live in the shadow of his lies. At approximately 8 p.m., Sandra left her parents' home, dressed for a casual evening, wearing a blue tweed jacket and black pants, and carrying a large white handbag. She told her parents she was heading to the Red Carpet Lanes, a bowling alley in West Allis, where she expected to find the person of interest. The drive from Menomonee Falls to West Allis is a routine one, but that night it represented a journey from safety into the unknown. When Sandra arrived at the parking lot of the Red Carpet Lanes, she stepped out of her 1980 Chevy Citation and, according to the official record, vanished from the sight of the world. The next morning came, and the silence was deafening. Sandra was a young woman who never missed her obligations. When she failed to return home, her father, Albert, began a frantic search. 3 days later, the white Chevy Citation was located. It sat abandoned in the bowling alley parking lot in West Allis, approximately 30 minutes from Menomonee Falls, perfectly locked with no signs of a struggle. There was no shattered glass, no disarray. It was as if the car had been placed there as a period at the end of a sentence. When the police began their inquiry, they naturally gravitated toward the man Sandra had gone to meet. He initially spoke with investigators, offering an alibi that placed him with another woman in Milwaukee, which might have been his other girlfriend. However, the narrative took a turn when he contacted the police a second time, claiming he had new details to share. But that interview never happened. His legal advisor called and said he will not be speaking to the investigators again. He ceased cooperation, and the case hit a wall of silence. At this point, the investigation takes a turn into the atmospheric and the eerie. An anonymous tip, the lifeblood of cold cases, directed the authorities to a location that felt like a setting from a Gothic mystery, Mount Olivet Cemetery in Milwaukee. The connection was not random, though. The boyfriend's father served as the cemetery's caretaker, and the boyfriend himself had worked on the grounds there. In Sandra's bedroom, her sister discovered a napkin with the cemetery's address scrawled in Sandra's handwriting. The question for investigators became a harrowing one. If a person wished to ensure someone was never found, would there be any more effective place than a landscape already dedicated to the quiet rest of the departed? In June 1988, under the gray skies of a Wisconsin summer, the police executed a search that would haunt the community for decades. They focused on a specific grave, the one that had been prepared for a burial the morning after Sandra disappeared. The theory was one of architectural concealment. Investigators suspected that the irreversible marking of the body had occurred and that the remains were placed beneath a legitimate, scheduled interment. With the permission of the family involved, a coffin was exhumed. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and then forensic teams excavated the earth beneath the burial site. It was a meticulous and scientific effort to uncover a devastating physical assault that they believed had been hidden in plain sight. But the earth was silent. The search yielded no trace of Sandra Bertolas. Years turned into decades. The case of Sandra Bertolas became a permanent fixture of Wisconsin's cold case files, but it was never forgotten. In 2001, 13 years after she vanished, the state took a rare step by launching a John Doe proceeding. For those unfamiliar with the terminology, a John Doe proceeding is a unique tool in the Wisconsin legal system which allows a judge to subpoena witnesses and compel testimony under oath in secret sessions. It is designed to break the wall of silence in cases where evidence is being withheld. For 21 months, the secret inquiry continued. Witnesses were called, and the boyfriend, now a man in his late 30s, was forced to face questions he had avoided since 1988. However, the legal threshold for a homicide charge is high. Without a body and without a confession of act, the John Doe concluded in December 2002 without an indictment. This outcome highlights the clinical difficulty of prosecuting no-body cases in the late 20th century. Despite the circumstantial evidence, the false identity, the cemetery connection, the abandoned car, the chain of custody for the truth had been broken. Sandra's father, Albert Bertolas, spent 22 years searching for his daughter. He passed away in 2010, joining the long list of family members who leave this world without the solace of an answer. Today, the disappearance of Sandra Bertolas is viewed as a tragedy and also as a cautionary historical mystery. It is a story about the fragility of our social contracts. We rely on the truth to navigate our lives, and when someone builds a life out of shadows, the collapse of that structure can be devastating. We do not focus on the mechanics of the crime, for those are known only to the silent. Instead, we focus on the mystery of Sandra herself, a young woman who valued the truth so much that she was willing to walk into the darkness to find it. Her legacy is the ongoing pursuit of justice in a system that sometimes moves slower than the passage of time. The file remains open, the shadows remain, but as long as the story is told with empathy and clinical precision, the light on Sandra Bertolas will never truly go out.